All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming to our panel discussion today. My name is Mike Wulff. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Ellucian, and I couldn't be more excited to have a chance to have a conversation with our distinguished panel today. I think what is going to be our content today is very much in the spirit of lessons learned, but looking forward. We have all talked about how technology enabled business process continuity and how it was a path or a means to an end. And I think, there's a lot of really interesting opportunity now as culturally we are now willing to kind of move with pace and move with purpose and really use technology as that foundation to accelerate outcomes, whether that be student outcomes, whether that be business process outcomes. And so today, we're going to have a conversation about the impact on the campus and what that actually means. And I'm going to let the panelists quickly introduce themselves, primarily because we have different perspectives. We have technologists who are responsible for administering and deploying the technology, and then we have other technologists, Matthew, who is actually tasked with building and actually subscribing to the technology. So with that, Matthew, if you want to just introduce yourself quickly, and we'll
Sure.
go down the line.
Thank you so much, and really glad to be here and with my distinguished colleagues. I'm Matthew Rascoff. I'm Vice Provost for Digital Education at Stanford University. And I think for the purposes of this panel, I'm not a CIO as my colleagues are, and so my team is more focused. We're at the Online Learning Office for Stanford, and our mission is to figure out what is the post-pandemic online opportunity that we have and to invest in it. So we partner very closely with our colleagues in IT, but primarily we are the users of the technology. We're not the providers of the technology. The other thing I would say is I started in my role in October of 2021. So I was not leading the pandemic response at Stanford. I was at Duke University for 4 years previously. So most of my experience of the pandemic kind of emergency phase was shaped by my experience at Duke, not at Stanford.
That's great. Kamalika?
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Kamalika Sandell. I'm the CIO at New Jersey Institute of Technology. It's in Newark, New Jersey. It's a polytechnic, deeply immersed in STEM. And similar to Mike, I joined September of 2020. Much of my pandemic emergency experience was at American University. It's a liberal arts campus in Northwest Washington, D.C., but fall of 2020 was unique, so I got to experience doing that at two campuses differently. And it's the nature of the campuses that make it different.
Rupa?
Good morning, everyone. Rupa Saran. I'm a Deputy CITO from Coast Community College District here at California. So we're a community college, 2-year system here. And unlike my colleagues here, I went through the entire pandemic, just like I'm sure the rest of the colleagues. And it has been interesting, even though, we talk about we as our system, we're so unique, but when you start talking with colleagues, it's not so unique. We all have done the similar things, so it'll be an interesting conversation today.
Hi, I'm Anthony Mutti. I am the CIO at Springfield College. I think that in contrast to some of the other colleagues here, our institution is not a highly online technical institution. We pride ourselves in residential experience and have been for over 100 years, and mostly around physical education and healthcare. And so the transition online was quite a bit of a shock for most of our faculty, and I think that provides sort of a very somewhat unique perspective on the transition.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm John Rotchy. I'm the Vice President for IT and CIO at Kent State University. Real quickly, we're about 36,000 students and 9 different campuses, R1 with the residential college as well. And really looking forward to talking about the future in terms of, yes, indeed, there was this thing that we had to all work through, but what's next? And so appreciate that.
All right, great. So if we think about any technology, and as you go through a deployment with a solution, you can have solid tech, and it can still fall short, primarily because it really is, are the people embracing the solution? Do you have process? Is the alignment there to facilitate? When you think, usually those transformations and when you're driving innovation are purposefully done. But there are, the occasion, and I've certainly seen that across higher ed more recently, where there's natural disasters, hurricanes, forced transitions to cloud, certainly earthquakes, other natural disasters. But the pandemic really was that forcing function. We had no choice but to embrace technology, how we worked, how we were going to ensure business continuity. But the reality is it was very disruptive. And, perspective changed. On campus, there are plenty of faculty who are not into distance learning. They very much value the time in the classroom. Administrators, alumni, faculty, or the broader staff like the way of working. We are creatures of habit, and that was just the reality. And that transformation, I think, is incredibly important. And Matthew, I'd like to start with you and just, what do you think of when you think about the biggest transition from the sort of emergency remote teaching, as Matthew was saying to me earlier, versus targeting an online or a hybrid experience to enable that outcome? And is there the appetite now to kind of move more formally into that model of instruction?
I mean, I think that is the key question to be asking right now. And I think it's really important to make that distinction between what we did in the pandemic, which was a crisis response, an emergency response, versus really well-designed, backwards-designed online learning, which is done with a team, with market research, with analysis. And it's a much more collaborative and patient process to create something good online. And so I worry that we're going to throw out the baby with the bathwater with respect to the opportunity, because people will falsely group all online learning with the Zoom teaching experience that they had, which was a very negative experience. So step one, I feel like, is just let's define our terms and make sure the categories are clear. Step two, I feel like there's just an incredible ambivalence right now that I think we need to help our colleagues through. And I would describe it as, like, on the one hand, there's a sense of like how precious the campus experience was. I think like being back face to face, I get the energy in this room from this conference. People are just so happy to be back together face to face. And they recognize like how powerful that is, how important it is. Like, it's like a family heirloom that you misplaced, and then it turned up, and you're like, I'll never take that thing for granted again. I'm going to take better care of that. I'm changed, right? But then on the other hand, I think there's also a kind of collective amnesia that's setting in which the past couple of years are being erased, and we're kind of going back to the way things were and settling into some of those old routines. And like that takes the form of like get back to normal. Apparently this happened after the Great Flu of 1918-19. And like people just like wanted to go on with their lives. 50 million people died in that pandemic, but it left basically no cultural imprint. And I think that that's kind of where we're at right now. It's like in this very ambivalent phase. And I think what we need to do is like, yes, move forward, but move forward in a way that is informed by the lessons learned. And do some research, and we're doing this at Stanford, try to understand and synthesize what those lessons were before the memories fade. Let's try to lock that in. Go around your campus, do a listening tour. We're writing this major report, which we're going to publish, and then create an inclusive process so that we don't lose those important lessons. Even if that experience was imperfect, those imperfections will often have important lessons that should be translated into new learning, new opportunities, and new designs. Now, that's, I think, the role for vendors to support, because you often have the data that can inform that kind of analysis, but also for institutional leaders to drive that process.
I think that makes a ton of sense.
Matthew, I mean, so true. And I think that's one thing that we should not forget, because if it's well designed, that's a very different story. The way we all went and then expecting that this is online is not correct. That's where I saw a lot of, yes, for past 2 years, we all very proudly, we say, yes, we did it. Of course we did it, because there was emergency. We all went, Zoom sessions went, students still continue with their learning, and faculty did their teaching. But if you go back and start asking, really, there are a lot of disconnect. I spoke to some of our faculty members. The example that I got was, yes, I got all the students, they're on Zoom. Of course, I'm teaching. But what I miss the most is when I walk around the classroom, when I see their screen, they're struggling. I can help, I can say what is going on. And that was not there. And so we can't just say that, this is how it's going to work. To your point, we need to include our faculty members. How do we design this? How do we get this disconnect, break this disconnect, connect those dots, and have those interactions. The human interaction is really, really important. So, yeah.
Yeah. So it's very similar. The modality of online, it's simply a modality. It allows convenience. It allows us to think of doing different things or things differently, leveraging that mode. And what happened during the pandemic was we shifted modality. We didn't necessarily say, how do we design the course content to make it immersive, and how does it tie with assessment? None of that was done because we were not allowed that time to be able to do that. So coming almost out of it, almost on the other side, the question is, can we start making better distinctions of what we did and what we did not do? And there's a role that all of us can have clearly articulating that. What were we able to do? We were able to shift modality. Great, check on us. And that was hard. It wasn't easy to do that, not at all. But we didn't necessarily create engaging content that allowed us to get to the kind of assessments that we need to get to with students and faculty engaged, allowing for organic interaction. That we didn't do.
Yes.
And drawing that line is useful. It's important for our boards to hear, important for our campus to hear. And kind of building on what both of you said, we came out of this experience. What did it teach us, but how does it change the path forward? And we're not talking about that binary view of pre-pandemic normal is what a lot of campuses want to go back to. And it's, NJIT is a polytechnic institute. We still use that in our vocabulary. We want to go back to pre-pandemic normal. That's what we had. And that's a huge miss.
Yes.
It's not. So I think the crisis communication versus online pedagogy, digital, and looking into what do we carry forward, those are probably the two biggest things. But none of these tools, can mimic the interaction, that organic interaction we were having yet. And so the question is, how do we use that without forgetting that it's the physical plus digital? It's the augmented affordances that both of those together can collectively offer us, that we have a unique opportunity to explore.
Yeah, I'll just follow up on that, because I think that everyone I agree with. I mean, I think we were very purposeful at Springfield College about defining this as a modality change, not an actual online course, because we don't want to influence people's opinions of online courses, which can be very good if they're designed that way. And hybrid's the same way. A hybrid course, if it's designed to be a hybrid course, can be a very great opportunity. But just throwing it online and making that the modality because it was an emergency situation is something we had to define and make very distinct to our population. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that the crisis forced an entire generation who maybe wasn't even comfortable online, teaching online, to recognize the strengths and the weaknesses of that platform and allow for further growth, that if we take the initiative, push forward, we're going to be able to make giant leaps that we could not have done without a crisis to sort of get everyone around and push forward. So I think it's just really important to recognize that it was different, and it wasn't perfect, but it's definitely a push forward.
I'll come back to the culture question for just a moment. And I think what the pandemic did for all of us is identified the art of the possible. And does that change culture? No, it doesn't. But I think another force in there is the expectation that our students bring to us or our learners bring to us, and identifying how to create comfort around what we do and do it well in the art of what is now necessary for us. One of our principles in planning is that volatility and disruption will continue. So if we are to do our job and we're to assist an organization in advancing, we really need to take that into effect and say, now what? How do we become more comfortable? Culture doesn't change overnight, so people are creatures of habit, so there's this, but how do you help people become comfortable? And so we're working hard to identify how training and use of these tools becomes better, but then also experiment and bring people in with mentors who've done it well, so that we can slowly change the attributes so that our culture changes along with it.
So John, obviously enablement's super critical, and driving to that outcome. I'm interested, how were you able to quantify success? Like, did you have a process for measurables? If we're doing things, as my organization builds software, we use what we call metrics that matter. It's how we quantify progress. It's how we can say, yes, we were successful. When you're coming into something unexpected, how do you put those measurables in place?
Is there a different question you can come up with? I think that's one thing we're trying to identify. And again, if our planning perspective is that volatility and disruption will continue, then how do we know we're actually progressing, right? Mm-hmm. Or are we just maintaining through kind of this turmoil? And we come back to some very basic sorts of things. One, are our constituents coming to us still? Two, have they met the sort of testing and assessment that we would expect? And three, are they staying with us? And then the fourth thing is, are they progressing to graduation on time? Well, we don't have that time span to determine, but our numbers are demonstrating that, okay, first pass, okay, it's okay. But what we're hearing more of is, now I want, or I would like, or I would prefer. Mm-hmm. And so there is a subjective part of this assessment, if you will, that we need to take a look at. And I would be open to any of my colleagues who actually have a measurement on this. Part of it is, are we using it well? Is there an adoption? And is there progress towards the next step in that life cycle? A little bit too early for us to say we have a measure or a metric yet, Matthew, but Mike, we're going to get there.
So I agree. I think, to be honest, I don't think any one of us have anything as yet. This is new to all of us. This was not planned. This is not technology. This is not faculty. This is not student. This is new to all of us. So this has to be developed. If what your question was, how do we improve and continue? So this is where lessons learned comes in, and now we need to come up with our actual measurements and metrics. And to me, it can't be IT. This is for the entire institution. This is not IT projects. This is not IT coming up with ideas. This is where all the governance committees and councils will come in, and we ought to include our students, because they will tell us, right? And if we leave them out, we are not going to be successful, because they are our consumers, they are our learners. We need to hear from them, what are they expecting, and what about our faculty members? There is a huge difference now. Our learners, students, are native digital. Our faculty members are still, we know that, and we need to acknowledge that, and we need to pay attention, and what are the gaps, and how do we fill it? So yes, this is something we all have to develop.
So I think back to, turn of the century. I was working in Capital One, and we implemented wireless, and we implemented it in pockets, and everybody thought we did a great job. And then 2010 on American University's campus, every time there was a blip somewhere on wireless, that's the worst thing that could have happened, okay? I would hear about it, and you kind of think, how did this become? Exactly when was that flipping point where it went from being something that was augmented to being something that people expected, like air all the time? And that's where understanding the climate perspective from the students' perspective is going to be key, because they're gonna tell us it's not just the assessment of the course, likely it's how they experience the course as it went through the process, and we're gonna have to figure out how to measure some of this. And it's interesting, because we look at the climate studies coming in, and even though the campus is back, and even though we treasure it, we're still seeing the students tell us that that matter of convenience, it's rated very high for online modality. What we want to do with it, I'm not sure yet, but we can't ignore it. It has to be factored in the design of the learning and in the design of what we do moving forward.
So Matthew, given this was your focus, did you have specific measurables that you would use to gauge impact and successfulness?
Yeah, I would say broadly speaking, I would put the metrics in two different categories. Category one, I would say, is like the customer service style metrics. So for example, my team at Duke, in a typical year, would interact with around 800 faculty pre-pandemic. During the pandemic, I think we had 4,200 unique faculty interactions. Like, that is a customer service metric that just shows how much demand there was for the support. Let's call that kind of level one. But I think level two is to tie those customer service metrics to shared outcomes that the institution supports. Like, let's say student learning outcomes or student wellness, which is an incredible area of concern that doesn't just focus on the academics, but thinks more holistically about the mental health of our students and the whole student and supporting the whole student. Like, how can we connect what we are doing in our individual areas to those broader metrics that everybody should care about? And that, I think, is one way to make whatever you do in your silo matter to your colleagues who are doing something quite different, if there are some shared goals around that. And I think, sometimes, you work for Ellucian, right? So it's a student information system. It may be hard to tie what you're doing to student outcomes, but there's often unexpected connections that you see. For example, there's an initiative called the College Transition Collaborative, which has rewritten the academic probation letter. Totally administrative document, like faculty never touch this. By rewriting the academic probation letter with growth mindset embedded into it, they've been able to support student success, students coming back on track much more effectively. It's a totally bureaucratic kind of behind the scenes intervention that has really made big impacts on student success. So I think it's sometimes surprising to see, like, what are those possible levers of change? They may be in the dining hall. They may be in the Wi-Fi networks and tracking the data of like who's coming and who's going and classroom metrics. Everybody, I think, can actually tie what they're doing to those broader shared goals, but we can't do it unless we set the bar higher in terms of what we measure and how we contribute.
Definitely. Awareness is critical, and then an effort to kind of distill the information and then take action on it.
Yeah.
Tony, having been so focused of having the students on campus and that student success, that outcome, do you feel like that culture's still there at Springfield?
So yeah, I think that culture, as we said, culture takes a lot of work to change, right? And everyone realized we're in a crisis. So obviously, culture hasn't changed quickly, and a lot of people want to get back to normal. So we're trying to doing some of the same things. But we have such a strong mission at Springfield College to basically raise servant leaders that I think, and everyone knows the mission, so I think everything we do and every decision we make is around that. So you start to see, it doesn't change as quickly as you might think. I think getting back to sort of the measuring part, though, that's the hard one, right? How do you measure? I mean, we have high retention rates. So since those haven't dipped, does that mean that we were successful in what we did? But at least we kept the students feeling like we cared enough, that they care enough to stay. When they actually graduate in 2 more years for those freshmen that came in, what does that mean? Are they going to graduate on time? Are they going to graduate with the same skills? Did we have to make certain, I don't know. It's just one of those things that we have to think about. I think we're definitely going to see the outcomes in the next couple of years as we see how this all played through.
I think, Mike, to that point, and what Matthew was saying also, is that it might give us different data points to look at, right? We may have certain things that could be categorized to help us understand some element of success, but it may actually open our eyes to different things we should push on or take a look at and identify, can that scale? Like, are we suited to scale that correctly? Like, if you go from 800 tickets or 800 interactions to 4,200, can we scale? Where are the points in which we can do something more effectively and to the point of, like, the students' well-being, for that matter, faculty and staff's well-being? Can we identify the way in which we're interacting or they're interacting to get some of that data back to also do some early interventions as well? So we don't have all of that yet, but I think those are good points for us to consider.
Absolutely. And so as you think about innovation can be incremental, Sometimes we think, okay, well, the iPhone came out, it disrupted an entire industry and changed our lives. But I think every bit as powerful is incremental innovation, right? Making progress. So, now that we have been through a pretty significant event that pivoted our dependency on technology, we have culturally started to recondition students and our faculty, staff, and administrators. What do you think about the opportunity now to really further accelerate? And as we start to turn to the future, higher education, really as a vertical, is it primed now for, more innovative disruption? And John, I'll start with you.
Appreciate that, because here's one thing that I saw very positive coming through the pandemic. We had tighter collaboration and communication at leadership levels, as well as those who were frontline workers. Tighter collaboration, tighter communication, sharing of ideas, and I think sharing of ideas helps us all grow. So coming out of that, one of the areas of impetus for us is to look at the student journey very holistically and not as just function A, function B, function C, and so forth, but really think about it far more holistically and identify how can we create an experience that adds value. Not only adds value in the immediate, but adds value into the future for what they will be and what they will encounter and do in society. And so when I think about the changes and the disruptions, maybe a disrupting factor that was very positive is we work closer together. We can sometimes be our own worst enemy by just doing something a particular way. So I found that to be actually very exhilarating. That will actually lead our initiatives into the upcoming few years.
I think that this whole notion of lifelong learning has been there for a while. It's not necessarily a new one, but what it showed us is when you start thinking of modality and lifelong learning and individuals, students coming in and out of the system at different times, but they're still as critical potentially to the undergraduate experience, which was crafted to be more consistent. But the proportion of lifelong learners is increasing over the years. So how can we think of engagement in a broader way? What are those engagement practices that should be there to handle or to work with a lifelong learning community without giving up on the undergraduate experience, but not necessarily diluting any of it for any of these factions? Because that's not something I would say both campuses that recently I was a part of, neither of those campuses had focused on it in a holistic way. And that's a missed opportunity. That's a huge missed opportunity. So we look at the students who went through the pandemic experience with us, and also the students who came from high schools as freshman classes, and they give us some interesting data of the misses. And how can we take that into consideration and go back to the experience? The culture question is fascinating to me because I was at a liberal arts campus. This is a tech campus. The cultures are different. And how we blend that within an ecosystem without giving its distinctiveness up. Tenure track faculty, teaching faculty, they're all there. NJIT is a STEM-heavy R1 university. But the students who are coming in, they're coming into our campuses because they're resonating with some aspect of it differently, right? So how do we not lose that uniqueness, but still figure out what to do with this data that we've garnered?
I appreciate your focus on the misses, and I just think it's the key to innovations is figuring out what is the underserved or non-served parts of a market or an audience. And if we pretend we're already serving everybody perfectly, we won't actually find those opportunities if you look at if you're looking for the disruptive opportunities. So acknowledging that we have left some people behind in this system of higher education that we have is actually step one. And to me, there's immense opportunities in the space, for example, of working learners. There's 53 million people in the United States today who earn below living wages, who've basically been left behind by the traditional higher education system. What can we do in order to serve them more effectively? In the pathway to college, there's deep inequities that are baked in to the K-12 system in the United States. What can we do with our technologies to reach upstream into that system and address and mitigate some of those inequities? Like, there's huge opportunities, I think, for leaps in innovation and using these technologies and our people collectively in different ways. But we need to focus, we can't stop serving our existing students well, but the biggest innovations are going to come from figuring out how to serve those who are not currently well served.
And Matthew, I was just going to kind of talk about that is, like Mike, you were saying, innovation and transformation, it happens slowly, right? And if we are going to innovate, we can't be thinking of today. We got to be future 10, 15 years. So keeping that in mind, who should be our audience? Not our current students. Elementary, middle school. These are the students, they are going to be the true innovators. And why don't we put them in our mix? When we are trying to come up with some blended teaching, blended technology, blended environment, we should be including that population and getting their ideas, getting the data points from there, and then go with that. So I think that's kind of, that's something else that we should not be missing.
So now with hopefully the pandemic behind us, and as we come out of the fog of the last 2 years, strategically across each of your different institutions, do you feel there's alignment now, both in terms of prioritization, focus, the outcomes, and then more specifically, the types of technologies are going to enable that outcome? And Tony, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so, as I sort of said in a few of my other comments, I think that technology has now taken a focus, right? We've all seen that we needed it to make it through, at least the way we did it. And so I think that on campuses, that the importance of technology beyond just being a service provider, but like an enabler, has been recognized. And so as we look at things, and we also recognize where we didn't have good technology, right? I think that, as you said, seeing those places where we failed, small private college, the access to data, the interoperability of our systems, our ability to get information that we needed quickly, it just wasn't there. So things that maybe you'd think you could get in a few minutes or a few hours could take days because we had to kind of collate it from all these different systems to get that information. So I think that those kind of investments where we invest in interoperability between systems, we invest in automations that make sense. The other piece of that is sort of our workforce, right? We want to keep education affordable. We can't have as many people. We have to be working smarter, not harder. And so we have to look for those opportunities to become more efficient. And those all are things that technology can help drive. And so all of our decision making has to be sort of, or how do we provide that education that everyone can afford who wants it and do it in a way that's sustainable. So,
John, specifically, what is your highest priority in the next 12 to 18 months from a tech investment?
Just one. It's all around data for us. It's understanding that data gives us the fluidity to move and to pivot and to act with some urgency in certain instances and flexibility in other instances and extensibility where we need it. So our focus absolutely is around data and allowing that data to work in some form of harmony across systems and be available where it needs to be. We really are trying to get out of the mindset of like application-centric sort of world and really think about outcome or need sort of things. And how do people work and where do they work and what do they want to interact with in order to do that? And we're working hard to create an environment that allows that. And in fact, we feel like we've actually made some strides in that way. And when we then think about using data, can we use data to help us scale in areas? I'll go back to the example of how many service calls can you take or what can be scalable? Well, if we have more and more students or learners, lifelong learning or otherwise, how do we mentor them well and scale well with them? Personalized bots, if you will, that assist them in their journey. So our focus is kind of in that area right now, related specifically to the student journey from point of first contact to lifelong learning and beyond.
That's great.
So I agree, data is really, really important, but the priority is also during the pandemic, another thing that we learned is fraudulent applications, how the financial aid is happening, right? So cybersecurity is really important. How do we protect our data, our digital assets? So, and we're aligning that, to your point, Mike, and also the broadband. Yes, we had our networks, but the lessons learned, how do we make that, our bandwidth larger? And this is where your remote instruction will go further along than what we did. So those are the few things that we're literally working even today to expand that so that we can collect all the data points and continue with our process of this journey here.
So, for us, it's a difficult question to give one answer to. But one of the biggest moments of awareness is this looking into the courses. We always had quality matters, and that was baked in. The rubrics were always there. But we now have a very robust focus and attention on pedagogy and using those learning and immersive tools to really create digital content that engages students. And I, for one, am thrilled. In fact, in my baseline, I'm showing NA not applicable as the baseline metric because it's a very low number of what we've been able to do. But the second thing is tying that to what the students are saying about the course itself. So we're taking that very seriously on our campus.
I mentioned I'm not a technology provider, so the procurement space is not mine, but maybe I'll make kind of a meta point for the vendors in the room who I think are often interested in what are our priorities. And I think there is an immense opportunity to build a bridge between the learning science that is happening in research laboratories right now at Stanford University and many other universities like it, and your tool and technology that has the potential to implement and scale those innovations and then feed that data back into the research. And Stanford has an initiative called the Transforming Learning Accelerator, which we've shared a little bit at this conference. And it's an effort to build a tighter, more tightly coupled system that connects what we are learning in the field with these tools with the research that's happening in labs and shortens the feedback loop so that we can improve the tools and technologies and also produce research on its basis. So that to me feels like an immense opportunity that we have to build a new model of industry academic collaboration that is really centered around data and evidence-based teaching and learning practices and moves past some of the kind of old industrial models where it's just like a sponsored research project. Like, it's got to look different than the way pharma has done this. And I do feel like there's some emerging opportunities to connect industry and academia more closely and more effectively.
Yeah, that's really compelling. So when you think about that and quantifying those student outcomes, as you've been looking at that, have you found any trends, or is it still too early in the initiative?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll mention a couple of efforts. There's a spin out from Stanford called TeachFX, it's a startup founded by an alum based on research that he learned at Stanford that is now, it has a Stanford faculty member who is the research partner for it, and it uses the audio data that comes out of an online class, or he's actually able to do it for a face-to-face class, to measure the equitable participation in a classroom and make sure, and then give feedback to the teacher that so Johnny or Jill or Rupa should be called on more often, and you should spread the voice around the room more fairly using the audio stream that comes from Zoom or whatever platform you're using. Like, that to me is an amazingly powerful innovation that is rooted in research about student voice and how important it is for equitable classrooms, that translated into technology, and now is the biggest data set of active learning anywhere in the world. So it's become an attractive kind of source of new research that we can do.
That's so powerful.
That's exciting, yeah.
Really cool. All right.
Well, I guess, Matthew, you just wowed all of us. We can't speak.
Drop the mic. Well, Appreciate everybody joining us this morning. I think, obviously when we look back on the pandemic, technology was a means to an end. It established business process continuity. But as you've heard, the biggest opportunity we have for further disruption and ongoing innovation is going to be our people. It's going to be our process. It's going to be an alignment. And then it's with that purpose and that intention, we are going to enable successful outcomes. So appreciate your time and have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.